In addition to the 6 new permanent bases in Afghanistan and a dozen or so new permanent bases in Iraq, the United States has now recently established military bases in Romania and Bulgaria. And today, NATO, under our direction, is developing, expanding new U.S. bases, or NATO bases, but essentially U.S. military bases in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And when you go home, look at your world map, and you'll see that those 3 countries are on Russia's border. How do you expect that Russia is going to respond as the U.S. military begins this encirclement of their nation? Recently, the RAND Corporation, many of you know of it, a California right-wing think tank, did a study calling for the breaking up of Russia into 3 separate countries. Just like we did in Yugoslavia, the Balkanization of that country, just like Senator Joe Biden, the good liberal Democrat from Delaware, wants to do in Iraq. He's got a bill proposing that we break Iraq up into 3 separate countries. And the idea is the same with Russia. Divide and conquer. Chomsky calls it imperial management. And he says imperial management demands obedience and needs to punish all transgressors, if only to set an example for others contemplating going the same way. That's how U.S. policymakers today think about Iran, Venezuela, Bolivia, Cuba, and any other country that dares ignore the boss. In preparation for this endless war, as you know, the Bush administration has increased military spending by over 50% during his time in office. Now, well over $650 billion a year Pentagon budget. 50 cents out of every one of your tax dollars. $12 billion a month on top of that $650 billion. $12 billion a month for the occupation of Iraq. And more than $2 billion a month for Afghanistan. We've spent now over $600 billion on the occupation of Iraq. In addition, the Pentagon has what's called the black budget, the secret budget. The Congress is not even allowed to know how the money is spent, mostly on high-tech space weapons technologies. $30 billion a year on the black budget. $10 billion a year on Star Wars research and development spending. A whole host of spending for endless war. The Pentagon is now saying that under corporate globalization of the world economy, every different country is going to have a different role. They say we're not going to have jobs in America anymore because it makes no sense. Corporations can move overseas, maximize profits internationally, cheaper labor in India, China, Indonesia, other parts of the world. They say under corporate globalization, our role in the United States will be security export. Security export. And as I define those words, what I come up with, again, is endless war. So working class kids are not going to have any other option in the future. There's not going to be any industrial jobs in America that is now being constructed under corporate globalization. They don't need a draft because they have the economic draft today. Young people virtually have to go into the military unless they want to flip hamburgers at McDonald's or Burger King. And how many of those jobs are there? The Pentagon says that today under corporate globalization, there's a part of the world that is not submitting to the authority of the corporations. And they call it at the Pentagon the non-integrating gap. The non-integrating gap. And our job then under security export, they say, will be to go into the non-integrating gap and suppress these populations to the benefit of the multinational corporations. And they define the non-integrating gap as the Middle East, where we are today with our permanent bases, or as the Pentagon calls them, enduring bases, Central Asia, where since 9/11 we've now built our permanent bases in Afghanistan. And when you look at your map, look at where Afghanistan is, right on China's inland border. Imagine how the United States would feel if China or Russia was building bases in Canada or Mexico. We'd be freaking out and going to war over it. Also, the Pentagon says that Africa is part of this non-integrated gap. And they say we'll be fighting in Africa in 20 years for their oil in oil-rich countries like Nigeria and Angola and Algeria. And in fact, recently the Pentagon has created a new military command called AFRICOM, Africa Command. Also, the Pentagon is saying that we're not going to do international treaties any longer because they restrict our ability to do first strike attack at any time we want. You might remember that one of the very first things King George II did when he came into office was to give Russia the 6 months' notice that the U.S. was pulling out of the ABM Treaty, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, that outlawed the testing and deployment of these so-called missile defense systems. So we're not going to do treaties anymore. In fact, I saw a presentation, a 3-hour presentation by a guy by the name of Thomas Barnett. It wrote a book called The Pentagon's New Map. It was on C-SPAN, and he was speaking to a room of military brass, telling them, this is the new military transformation plan. You're going to get on board with it, you're going to go out and teach it to those under you, or else you're not going to get promoted in the years ahead. And when he was saying that we're not going to do treaties anymore, he said this: Adolf Hitler never had to ask permission to invade another country, and we will not either. International treaties would restrict our ability to do first strike attack anywhere at any time. When the United States launched the shock and awe invasion of Iraq in 2003, in the initial attack, 70% of the weapons that the Pentagon used were directed to their targets by space technology. Space technology today coordinates all warfare on the earth below. And the Pentagon has said for some years now, well, if we could do that, so could someone else. And therefore, we cannot allow anyone else to have access to space.